Dave, can you hear us?
Oh, there we go. If I had to unmute, can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay, great.
Yes.
Yep, had it muted.
That's usually what happens.
Yeah. Are you seeing my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, good.
Alrighty. Good morning, everybody. Thank you all for joining us today for the New Mexico Weather Outlook webinar series. My name is Victoria Atencio, and I am the Environmental Education and Community Outreach Coordinator for the Pueblo of Santa Ana. Can everybody hear me?
I hear you.
Yeah, you're fine.
All right, and we're recording. We're on now.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, so we have a few logistics before we get started today. Everyone is muted and the webinar is being recorded. The webinar recording will be shared with attendees and will also be available on the Covera Coalition and NIDIS websites. Feel free to post any of your questions or comments in the Q&A box. Leah will be moderating the Q&A session at the end of this webinar. These monthly webinar presentations will provide information on current and upcoming weather and climate conditions in New Mexico, with a highlight on conditions on tribal lands. The webinars will take place on the fourth Thursdays for the next 3 months. And today is July 23rd. We have one on August 27th and September 24th. These webinar series are made possible by the following partners: Dave Dubois, New Mexico Climate Center; myself, Victoria Atencio from Santa Ana Department of Natural Resources; Ariel Quintana and Leah Potter from the Covera Coalition; Joel Lisenby from NOAA NIDIS; and Helena Deswood from the USDA Southwest Climate Hub. Dave, if you can move on to the next slide, we just have a few announcements before our presentation. The first one is the Commission for Environmental Cooperation. NIDIS and CEC has launched a new survey to help identify and compare available drought information, products, and tools in North America. More information can be found on their website at www.cec.org, and the link can be found here as well as being provided in an upcoming email. And let's see. On behalf of the Covera Coalition and the Southwest Climate Hub, in partnership with Santa Ana Pueblo, we had planned to have a rangeland precipitation monitoring workshop. Due to COVID, we are still postponing that, but plan to provide that workshop in the fall of 2021. And our last announcement is the Soil Health Tech Tools Watch Party, which will be held on Wednesday, August 12th and the 26th from 5:30 to 7 p.m. The information can be found on the Covera Coalition website. Leah, let me know if you have anything else to add to that.
Sure. Thanks, Victoria. So we're taking these opportunities that while we're all sort of in this stage of the pandemic, to learn about different technology that's available to help folks build soil health and manage farms and manage ranches. So this is one of a series of tech tools watch parties. And so if you're interested in learning some technology together, that's the goal. So you can check it out on the website. Thanks, Victoria.
Yeah, awesome. And then with that, I would like to introduce our speaker, Dr. Dave Dubois. state climologist of New Mexico, director of the New Mexico Climate Center, and associate college professor at New Mexico State University. He provides climate and climate change information and education to policymakers, the agricultural community, industry, educators, students, as well as the public. In addition, he also gives numerous talks and holds workshops every year on topics covering climate, drought, air quality, and climate change.
All right, thank you for that introduction. I really like the rooster in the background here. Okay, let's get started. So let's look at precipitation in July. So this is the average. This is percent of average precipitation from July 1st through the 22nd, which is yesterday. And let's see, if you're in that area where it's red to orange to yellow, you're below average. And if you're up in the Northeast, sort of all the way from Union to parts of Colfax, all the way down to Roosevelt, it's spotty, but doing well in certain locations. But if you look at the sort of the 2/3, the west side of New Mexico and Arizona, it's pretty bad right now. However, it's not all bad news right now. The monsoon's starting to kick up, but it's dry right now. So, I mean, you all know that. Let's look at the temperatures over New Mexico over the same time period from July 1st to 22nd. Most all of New Mexico is above average. Far north, 1 to 3 degrees Fahrenheit above average. And if you're in the southeast, you're around 5 to 7, and a little pocket around Roswell between 7 and 10 degrees above average. So as a result, we're getting a lot of evaporation, evapotranspiration. Drought stress on plants is on order for this first part of July. Let's look at some of the weather stations across the state. Let's do like we did last webinar. We looked at a few. I added Clayton, so this is all the way up in Union County. So the current calendar year, so this is from January 1st through yesterday. So the smooth brown line, that's the long-term average. That's where we should be, 30-year average. And then the stepwise green graph, that's the actual. So as you can see, we're below average, about an inch and a half below average. We've got 6.89 inches there. Let's go further toward the southwest of there. Cochiti Dam, pretty close to average. Current calendar year, about a little over 5 inches, about 5.5 3/4 inches is the average. 6.16 last year, so not as bad as other places, but still a little bit below average. Looked a little further south in Los Lunas at the Agricultural Science Center there. Current calendar year at 3 inches, and that's a little more than an inch behind over the average, which the long-term average is 4.16. Got 3.83 last year, so a little. As you can see, we're running below average through the Rio Grande Valley. Just go all the way up all the way up north toward the Colorado border in Dulce. Current calendar year stands at 4.19 inches, and that's quite a bit below the long-term average of 8.73. As you can see the graph there, the green line is a lot less far below the long-term average, and we had 11.71 at this time last year. So we're doing pretty poorly up there in Dulce and that whole area. Go further west to Farmington at the Agricultural Science Center, up on the mesa on south of town. So we're running pretty low there too. It's pretty dry. 1.74 inches for the calendar year since January, and we usually get about 3.87, and we had even more of that last year, 5.57 last year. So running pretty dry there. If you can look at that green graph, all those horizontal lines there showing no precipitation. We had a little bit of precip in beginning of June, end of May, and then one recently a week ago, but really nothing really to speak of since March. Let's look at stream flow. I like to look at going back 4 months. So the blue line, the squiggly line, that's the actual flow on the rivers. And then the orange triangles, that's the long-term average. So if you go on the upper left, Animas and Farmington, you can see basically it shows the runoff pattern for this year. We were right about average from toward the end of April through the beginning of June, but then that's when we saw the full melt out, and we're seeing a lot well below average in Animas. So below that, if you go to the bottom left, Pecos above Santa Rosa Reservoir, above average starting off in the runoff season, but then quickly going down to below 10 CFS, single digit CFS starting in May. And we've had a few rain events, and then we had a transfer, a block release out of Santa Rosa, but this is the above Santa Rosa water going into it. So on the right side, the two there are two Rio Grande gauges. The top one, top right, is an Embudo station that has 89 years of data there. So that's what the little the orange triangles are. As you can see, pretty much the whole season, other than early March, late March, I mean, we were right about average, but it's been declining since then. The far bottom right there is Rio Grande at Albuquerque station. You can see the blue line pretty low, maybe 400 or 500 CFS compared to what we should be getting over 1,000 early in June, and then they average about 600, 700 right about now, but we're down to near 300. So pretty low. It's kind of indicative of what we saw up north in the snowpack and coming down. So that's the story. Not much water flowing down. So here's our reservoirs. This is from our state drought call a couple days ago. Just starting out, I'm just looking at I'm not going to go through all the numbers here, but just seeing through some of the reservoirs are pretty close to last year. A little lower. So Navajo, about a couple hundred thousand CFS below last year. The numbers from Santa Rosa are quite, basically there was a block release out of Santa Rosa. That's why the difference, we have 5 right now compared to last year, 71. And just go down the line there. Most all of them are below what we had last year. And including Elephant Butte, we're about 200,000. We had 500,000 there last year. So the irrigation season is still on, so it's not done yet. So we're still drawing down on the reservoirs in the Rio Grande and the Pecos. Let's look at some of the soil. Look at the column relative soil moisture percent over the past 1 month. So this is the last month of soil compared to all the other 1 months in the past. As you can see, it's kind of indicative of we've gotten some monsoonal moisture throughout New Mexico, and even you can see that pocket of really moist soils in the northeast, and especially up in Union County, where there's some 4 or 5 inches we've had, and then recently. And even in San Miguel County, a few pockets there, as well as in Mora County. But by and large, some of the areas that are still in really dry in the far north are this column soil is still pretty dry. Let's look at so that's basically as a result of some of the recent, just in the past couple weeks, the soil moisture. But if you look back on the last 6 months, comparing the last 6 months to all the other 6 months, this is what it looks like. So it's dry. So the browns and reds, those are all the percentiles. So we're in the below average for most, except for that part of the northeast, which is basically biased because of the recent rains in the last couple weeks. And we had some rains down in southern New Mexico and Otero and southern Doña Ana counties, but by and large, the rest of the state is pretty dry. So how is the vegetation responding? So this is the vegetation drought response index, VegDry. There's one of many other, there's a lot of other indices that we use. I just picked one here. I'm just showing you you just take a look at the range condition colors. Look, the far reds over in Lee County, it's just looking at severe drought, but there's kind of a spattering all over the state, especially kind of more or less the northern half of the state, and then almost half of the state on the east side. So almost like you can see the pre-drought stress through moderate to severe drought all over the place. So so it's kind of indicative of what's going on with the monsoon. It's hit and miss. It's a real spotty in some places. Some places are getting quite a bit of rain, and some places are not, just missing out yet. So, but it's still early on the monsoon. We're only on 3/4 or 2/3 of the way through July. So we're almost done with July, but we still have a couple more months. So we're waiting to see for that. So how are things looking in terms of conditions? That's the latest drought map there from last week, not this week's, but looking at the impacts all across Colorado as well as New Mexico, it's matching what we're seeing on the ground. Everything from dry stock tanks to browning of some of our croplands and hauling water some areas. So it's still dry in the areas. We're waiting to see how the monsoon improves this. So one of the products we're looking at is called Grass Cast, and their link is on the bottom there, but let's look at the maps. So there's 3 different scenarios on the left. If that's what the range conditions, the grassland production will look like if the rainfall through the end of August is above average. The middle graph is if the rains through right now through the end of August is average, and then on the right is if we get below average monsoonal moisture. So right now we're still mostly in the below average, so on the right side. However, it's still early. We won't be able to assess these until we get toward the end of next month, but things are not looking good in some areas. Even if we get average rainfall, there's a few areas over in San Miguel and parts of Mora County where even if we get average rainfall, the grassland production, it would be below average. So just heads up on that. So here's the latest drought map that was published this morning. So we've got 94% of New Mexico is in drought. 100% is in some level of D0, which is a pre-drought. We've got 42% of the state is in the D2 to D4. That's at sort of the tan to red. And then we've got splotches of the D3 in that red zone. We've had a little more red last week, but a few of the rains in the Northeast kind of improved conditions a bit. It's not enough to bring it down to D2, but it's still pretty dry out there. But we've had a little bit of improvement, not that much. So that's the current drought. Remember, this is updated every week on Thursday mornings. So let's transition over to the outlook. So we're looking at the area where on the left side, there's a Nino 3.4 label, and then there's a brown and blue. I circled that area where it's blue. That's the average sea surface temperatures across the Central Pacific. And if you look at that bottom right map, that little box that says Nino 3.4, that's what we look at as the clues for what's going to happen long term on our seasonal, looking at the winter time. So we get clues about the wintertime precipitation and weather patterns based off of how the Pacific Ocean is above average or below average. So that's kind of the area. So it's been trending below average, that blue. We had a little bit of uptick in there earlier, but it's still trending toward a cooling. So let's look at that. So it's about minus 0.2 degrees Celsius below average, and that's still in the neutral range. It's not in the La Nina. Remember, La Nina is a cooling. We're seeing that cooling, and then El Nino would be the warming. So we're definitely in the cooling in there in the Central Pacific. So what does that mean? So when we kind of process all that data and then put it into models, and we look at a probability. So this is a seasonal forecast probabilities for is it going to be either a neutral, stay neutral like it is now? Is it going to go into a La Nina or an El Nino? Pretty much El Nino is pretty much out of the picture. That's the red bars, and these are probabilities. So if you go here, the bars are amount of probability. So right now, if you go all the way in the left side, the JJA, that's June, July, August, the probabilities of a La Nina are 30%, and neutral is just shy of 70%. It's like 67% or so. So right now we're in the neutral, but as you go further down the line in the future, So go all the way down to October, November, December. So like right above that season label. The blue line is more than 50%. The gray line is about 40. And then the red is about 5. So right there, that shows you that the La Nina is right now is favored for the winter time, and a little more than 10% probability higher than the neutral. So right now we're looking at a potential La Nina for this coming winter. So what does that mean? Well, it's not a good sign. In the past, a lot of the La Ninas, not everyone, but a lot of the Ninas in the past for New Mexico have been warmer and drier. And so that's not a good signal for, remember we're mainly a snow-driven surface water state, so we're relying on snowpack. So that's sort of a heads up on the potential for a drier and warmer winter time. So that's the bad news. The good news is the monsoon is starting to kick up. So it's kind of, I don't want to make it all depressing, but this is the latest seven-day forecast through pretty much the end of July. Colors here, the reds are around 2 to 3 inches, mostly hitting the higher terrain. So on the west side looks pretty good. Out through, this is through today through next Thursday, so the whole week. So it looks pretty good. Not as much precip on the southeast side, although they may get a few thunderstorms in there. So that's our monsoon. We're basically dipping into some of the really good subtropical moisture in here, the highs position, so that we're drawing up a lot of that moisture from the south, which is good. We've had a delayed monsoon, and we really wanted to see that coming, but we're finally seeing some of it come up now, and we've had some good thunderstorms throughout New Mexico here. So let's go a little further in outlook. So through August 1st, basically July 28th through August 1st, left-hand side is the temperatures. So most of the state is right around neutral, so it can go either way, which is fine. On the right is great news. We're seeing higher probabilities of above average. So all the way South Texas, all the way across through Arizona, which is good. That's basically our monsoon signature. So that's our good news through the beginning of August. Let's go a little further through the end of July through August 5th. Let's focus in on the right side, precipitation. So Arizona, looks like the monsoon is favoring Arizona, but it still looks not too bad for New Mexico, although there is a dry signal starting to show up in the east side of the state, as well as southern Colorado and the Panhandle, Texas. So it's not a high probability, so I wouldn't be too concerned about it right now, but there's a signal coming in that we're seeing some drying out a little bit on the northeast part of the state. So let's go a little further on the outlook through this is our longer lead 3 to 4 week outlook, which goes basically the first 2 weeks of August. Focus mainly on the right side. The left side, it shows you the above average temperatures, but on the right side, it shows you, look at New Mexico and southern Colorado Panhandle. That signal seeing the higher probabilities, for at least 50% probability of seeing a below average precipitation. However, the monsoon is still kicking up in the southwest New Mexico and southeast Arizona. However, that area is concerning me, that eastern side of the state, and also as well as southeast Colorado, which is still very dry. There's areas of D3 in there, as well as the Panhandle, Texas there. So let's look a little further, the rest of August. Above average temperatures on the left. On the right, there's that below average, that B. So there's an enhanced probability. So if you're a betting man person, you're looking at the good chance for below average precipitation. So let's go a little further out, August through October. So getting to the fall, still going to be above average temperatures, but on the right here, we're seeing that B. We don't like to see that. So that's right at the beginning of our water year. We don't want to start off with low precipitation. We like to get some wet soils, bring up the column soil moisture to have wet soils before we get into the winter. However, there's some chance that it's not very high. It's 33%, but it is favoring some below average precipitation as farther you get up north in the Colorado and in Utah as well. So let's go look. So since we talked a little bit about the La Nina, so what does that mean for if you go past the fall, what does that look like for the winter time? So here's our extended outlook, and this is the last slide I'll show other than the drought outlook. Pretty much, this is what a La Nina usually looks like. It's almost textbook, where you see on the right side the below average in the lower tier states in Arizona, New Mexico, as well as Texas and Florida, all dry. So basically, the jet stream is moving further north. It's sort of tweaking the storm patterns, the storm tracks going further north into upper tier states, leaving the southern tier states dry. So what does that mean for drought outlook? Last slide I'll present here. Droughts persisting throughout much of the Intermountain West, throughout the Great Basin, and even parts of the Pacific Northwest, and a few areas where they're not drought or likely drought's going to develop. So that's the bad news. Good news, monsoon is starting to kick up. However, as we get further along in there, there's a potential for a below average later in the monsoon, and then not a good sign for our winter time. So that's it for the drought update. I give you a little bit of good news, but then I'm more concerned about the winter time right now. So thank you for inviting me on here.
Thank you so much, Dave.
Back to you.
I am not seeing questions. I hope that's not because of my view. I don't know if other organizers are seeing questions in the question box, but I invite anyone and everyone to submit questions either by writing it into the chat box or writing it into the question box, or if you have the ability to unmute yourself by clicking the microphone button, which is probably in your upper right, you can do that and ask your question directly. So I'll give folks a second to do that. I have a question, Dave, while folks organize their questions in their minds. How unusual is this drought that we're seeing? Is this how does it compare to past droughts that you've seen?
Right now, this one is a pretty warm drought. We've seen a lot of records. We tied some records, broke a few daily records, no all-time records, not like 94, or any other. But it's been a short, intense. We've seen a little pockets of we call flash drought, where things really dry out fast, and high temperatures, no rain can really dry out the soil column, as well as anything has come up. Short-term precipitation bringing up some native vegetation, then things get burned off. I've seen a lot of pictures of really poor range conditions in some areas that have kind of missed out. So I think that this really warm drought this year is really taking a toll in some areas. So we really need to pay attention to not only the precipitation but the temperatures, which is a lot of things driven by the evapotranspiration, which that's the water loss through the vegetation. So very concerning about that. However, with the more cloud cover that we're getting, right, I'm sitting here in Las Cruces and we got really good cloud cover, which really helps out. Even though temperature is a little high, it's reducing that evapotranspiration a bit, so which is helping out. Even if we don't get rain, that helps out. When we get that clear sky and wind and really hot, that's the concern when we get some flash drought areas. So yeah.
Thank you. It's tough. It's kind of wild that we have such a drought this year, but appreciate all the information about it.
Yep.
And I just received word that it doesn't look like you all are able to unmute yourselves. So sorry about that. If you do have a question, please type it into the question box or into the chat box. Or you can send a message that just says, unmute me, and then I can unmute you.
Then you can always send emails too. You got our emails there.
Great. Yeah, it's a great point. Yeah, they're written right there. Oh, I see a question that just came in to me. So the question is, How are people responding to the drought conditions? Are people selling their cattle, etc.?
Yeah, really good question. So I get in my information from some of the ranchers and the Farm Service Agency. We have a growing network of people who like to share information. So what information I have, I mean, it's been harder with COVID-19. Is I like to get out in the field and talk to people, but what I've been getting, people have been sharing photos of really poor rain conditions. Some of them more on the east side of the state, and and I've heard some folks there are reducing their herd numbers, and that's not good. And those are the same areas that they've been hauling water, and mainly been doing a lot of supplemental feeding in some of those areas that are in the D1 through 3 areas, and which is that's a big part of the state. So yeah, I've heard some really bad news about that, herd numbers going down, and some of them have even mentioned to me that they've never really recovered from the droughts from 5 years ago, 6 years ago, even further. So they're still rebuilding some of their herds. So it's not good either.
Oh, geez, that's so tough to be hit with another drought while still trying to recover from a previous drought. Wow. So are there any final questions if people have them? This is the moment. All right, well, I'm not seeing anything, and I guess we're at the hour, or we're at 11. So thank you so much, Dave. It's always informative listening to you, and we just appreciate all the time you take putting this together. And Victoria, would you like to finish this out?
Yeah, so I would just like to thank everybody for joining in on this webinar today. As we had mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, these webinars are recorded and will be posted on the Covera and NIDIS websites, as well as being sent out to all of our attendees. If you guys have any questions of what we covered today or would like to hear in a future webinar, please feel free to enter those thoughts into the chat box, and or you can send any one of our organizers an email. And I'd just like to thank all of our organizers as well for continuing these webinar series and creating this collaboration. And with that, I wish you all well, stay safe, and stay healthy.